Do you think your parents would choose your sister's dog over saving your life? I lived that nightmare. When they read what I left behind, the color drained from their faces, and they realized they had lost their daughter forever. This story will show you why sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do. I was rushed to the hospital unconscious. The doctors called my parents, but they replied, "We can't, our other daughter is walking her dog." Even after being told tonight might be her last, they never came. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and for 28 years I believed family always comes first. I was wrong. Growing up, I was the good daughter. While my sister Emma got to be the free spirit, the creative one, the one whose feelings mattered, I was the responsible one. The one who paid bills when Dad lost his job. The one who drove Mom to her doctor appointments. The one who never complained, never asked for anything, never made waves. Emma had Princess, a golden retriever she'd gotten for her 16th birthday. I'd asked for a car that year. Guess which one of us got what we wanted? Princess wasn't just Emma's dog, she was the family's princess, literally. That dog had her own bedroom, her own Instagram account with more followers than I had, and a monthly grooming budget that exceeded my grocery allowance. But I told myself it was fine. I told myself that being needed made me valuable. Every time Mom called at 2 a.m. because she couldn't sleep and needed to talk, I answered. Every time Dad's business struggled and he needed a loan, I transferred the money. Every time Emma had a crisis, a breakup, a job loss, a creative block, I dropped everything to help. I'd been conditioned since childhood to believe that my worth came from what I could provide. Love bombing disguised as family closeness. They'd shower me with praise when I sacrificed, then withdraw affection when I tried to set boundaries. It was a perfect system for them. The warning signs were everywhere, but I missed them. When I got promoted at work, the family dinner conversation immediately shifted to Emma's new art project. When I bought my first house, Mom spent the entire housewarming party talking about Princess's obedience training achievements. When I mentioned feeling overwhelmed, Dad would say, "That's what family is for. We all help each other." But somehow the help only flowed in one direction. Financial manipulation was their specialty. Dad would say things like, "You're so good with money, Rebecca. Could you handle the family emergency fund?" Then that fund would somehow always have emergencies that needed my personal savings. Mom would guilt me with statements like, "I know you don't mind helping. You've always been so generous." Emma would borrow money and then act hurt if I mentioned repayment, saying, "I thought we were family, not a bank." I was caught in what psychologists call a trauma bond. The intermittent reinforcement, occasional praise mixed with emotional neglect, created an addiction to their approval. I was chasing the high of being the good daughter while slowly drowning in resentment I wasn't allowed to feel. The gaslighting was subtle but constant. When I'd express frustration about always being the one to sacrifice, they'd say things like, "You're being dramatic," or "You know we appreciate you," or "That's not how it happened." They'd rewrite history to make my complaints seem unreasonable, my feelings invalid. Emma played her role perfectly. She was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the scapegoat who was expected to fix everything wrong. When Emma quit her job to find herself, it was called brave. When I mentioned being tired from working 60-hour weeks to cover everyone's expenses, it was called selfish. The isolation tactics were so gradual I didn't notice. They'd make plans without including me, then act surprised when I felt left out. They'd share inside jokes from family gatherings I wasn't invited to. They'd create group chats that didn't include me, then reference conversations I'd missed. I was simultaneously essential to their functioning and excluded from their bonding. But the night everything changed started like any other Thursday. I was driving home from work, exhausted from another 14-hour day. I'd covered for a colleague who'd called in sick, stayed late to finish a project that was due Friday, and somehow still found time to transfer money for Mom's unexpected dental work. I remember thinking about Princess as I drove. Emma had sent a family group text earlier, the one that included me, showing Princess at her grooming appointment. The bill was $347. I'd paid for it, of course, because Emma was between jobs again. I was calculating in my head how that grooming bill compared to the last time I'd spent money on myself. I couldn't remember the last time. That's when the truck ran the red light. I don't remember the impact. I don't remember the ambulance ride. I don't remember being rushed into surgery. What I remember is waking up 3 days later to the sound of machines beeping, my body feeling like it had been rebuilt from spare parts, and asking the nurse where my family was. The look on her face told me everything. "Honey," she said gently, "we've been calling them. They said they'd try to come when they could." Try to come when they could. I was in the ICU fighting for my life, and they'd try to come when they could. That was my first clue that everything I'd believed about family, about love, about my value to the people who claimed to care about me was a lie. But I was about to learn just how deep that lie went. Day 1 in the ICU, I was unconscious. Day 2, barely aware. Day 3, when I woke up asking for my family, the nurse's uncomfortable expression told me everything I needed to know. Day 4, I started asking specific questions. Day 5, I learned the truth that would change my life forever. "What exactly did they say when you called?" I asked Nurse Jennifer, a kind woman in her 50s who'd been checking on me every few hours. She hesitated, looking at her chart instead of at me. "Sweetie, maybe you should focus on getting better first." "Please," I said, "I need to know." Jennifer sat down in the chair next to my bed. "We called within an hour of your arrival. The surgery was touch and go. We told them you were in critical condition and asked them to come immediately." "And?" "Your mother said they couldn't come because your sister was walking the dog." When we explained how serious it was that you might not make it through the night, she said they'd try to make it the next day. The words hit me like a physical blow. Try to make it the next day. While I was fighting for my life, they were prioritizing Princess's evening walk. "We called again around midnight," Jennifer continued, her voice gentle but factual. "Your father answered. We told him point blank, tonight might be her last," he said, and I wrote this down because I couldn't believe it. "We understand, but Emma is really upset about the dog situation, and we can't leave her alone right now." The dog situation. My life or death emergency was inconveniencing the dog situation. I closed my eyes and tried to process what I was hearing. In the next bed over, Mrs. Chen had been visited by 17 family members in the past 3 days. Her grandson had driven 12 hours from college. Her neighbor had brought homemade soup. Even her mailman had stopped by with flowers. "How many people have visited me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Just the emergency contact we called from your phone. Your friend Sarah from work. She's been here every day, but she's at her job now. She left those flowers and said to tell you she'll be back tonight. Sarah, someone who wasn't even family, cared more about my survival than my actual family did. Sarah, who barely knew me outside of work, had rearranged her schedule to sit by my bedside while my parents couldn't be bothered to interrupt dog walking. Day 6 brought a revelation that completed my understanding. Dr. Williams, the surgeon who'd saved my life, stopped by during rounds. He was a straightforward man in his 60s, and I could tell he was struggling with something. Rebecca, I need to ask you something, and please don't feel pressured to answer. Do you have any issues with your family that we should be aware of? Any conflicts or estrangements? No, I said automatically, then stopped. Why? In 30 years of medicine, I've never seen a family respond to a critical emergency the way yours did. We've had homeless patients with more visitors than you've had. It's unusual. Unusual, that was the professional way of saying completely screwed up. What exactly did they say in all the calls? Dr. Williams pulled up his notes. First call, 9:47 p.m. Mother stated they were busy with family pet emergency and couldn't come until the next day. Second call, 11:23 p.m. Father stated the other daughter was too upset to be left alone. Third call we made the next morning. Mother asked if visiting hours were flexible because they had prior commitments. Prior commitments. While their daughter was in intensive care. Doctor, I said slowly, what would normal families do in this situation? They'd break speed limits getting here. They'd sleep in the waiting room. They'd call in sick to work, cancel vacations, hire babysitters. Normal families treat this like the emergency it is. That's when I started laughing, not happy laughter, the kind of laughter that comes when your entire worldview shatters and rebuilds itself in the space of a conversation. I'd spent 28 years believing I was loved, valued, essential to my family's happiness. In reality, I was less important than their dog's bathroom schedule. Day 7 was when everything clicked into place. Jennifer brought me a phone charger so I could check my messages. I had 17 missed calls from Sarah, 3 from my boss asking if I was okay, 1 from my elderly neighbor who noticed I hadn't picked up my mail, 0 from my family, but I did have text messages, a group chat that included Mom, Dad, Emma, and me. The timestamp was from day 2 of my hospitalization, when I was still unconscious. Emma. Princess was acting weird on her walk yesterday. Think she knew something was wrong. Mom. Dogs are so intuitive, she probably sensed Rebecca's accident. Dad. Animals are amazing that way. Princess is such a smart girl. Emma. She's been extra cuddly. I think she's worried about Rebecca. They were discussing how the dog was handling my near-death experience, not visiting me, not checking on my condition, but analyzing Princess's emotional state about my trauma. The dog had more emotional support during my crisis than I did, but then I saw something that stopped my heart. A separate group chat, same family members minus me. Screenshots that Sarah had somehow obtained and sent to my work phone. Apparently, Emma had mistakenly sent her one of the messages meant for family only. Dad, Rebecca's accident is really bad timing with Emma's art show next week. Mom, should we postpone the show, though she's worked so hard? Emma, maybe Rebecca will be better by then. I really don't want to cancel. Dad, we'll figure it out. Rebecca's strong. She always bounces back. Mom, true, she's never been high maintenance like some people. They had a secret family chat, without me, where they discussed me like an inconvenience, my recovery like a scheduling conflict with Emma's art show. I wasn't a daughter fighting for her life. I was a logistical problem interfering with their real priorities. That's when the transformation began. Not the gradual realization, but the sudden, crystalline clarity that changes everything in an instant. I wasn't their daughter. I was their ATM, their emotional support system, their problem solver, their safety net. But I wasn't their family. Real family doesn't have secret group chats that exclude you. Real family doesn't prioritize dog walks over deathbed vigils. Real family doesn't discuss your medical emergency like a scheduling inconvenience. I'd been the victim of a 28-year psychological manipulation campaign, so sophisticated that I'd thank them for the privilege of being exploited. But victims can become survivors, and survivors can become strategists. For the first time in my adult life, I started thinking about what I wanted instead of what they needed. I wanted a family that showed up. I wanted relationships based on mutual respect, not one-sided sacrifice. I wanted to matter to the people who claimed to love me. Since I couldn't have that with them, I'd have to build it without them. The plan started forming as I lay in that hospital bed, listening to Mrs. Chen's grandson read her poetry in Mandarin, watching Sarah bring me soup she'd made at home, observing Dr. Williams check on me with more genuine concern than my parents had shown in 3 decades. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and I knew exactly when I was going to do it. When they finally showed up on day 7, a full week after their daughter almost died, they'd find an empty bed and a letter that would destroy every comfortable lie they'd built their family dynamics on. The letter that would change everything. Writing the letter became my obsession during recovery. Not the angry, emotional rant I wanted to write, but something far more powerful. A document of facts that would make their negligence undeniable. I'd learned about strategic communication from years of corporate negotiations, but I'd never applied those skills to family relationships. That was about to change. This letter needed to be bulletproof, unemotional, and devastating in its clarity. Sarah visited every evening after work, bringing updates from the outside world and, more importantly, helping me think through my decision. "Are you sure about this?" she asked on day 5 as I outlined my plan. "They haven't visited once," I reminded her. "It's been 5 days since their daughter almost died, and they haven't found 2 hours to drive here. But they found time to take Princess to the groomer." Sarah pulled out her phone and showed me Emma's Instagram story from that afternoon. Princess, freshly groomed, wearing a new pink bow. The caption read, "Princess is getting pampered while we deal with family stress. Self-care jugger dog mom, family stress." My fight for life was family stress that required dog pampering to cope with. "What exactly will this letter accomplish?" Sarah asked. "Clarity," I said. "For 28 years, they've been able to gaslight me about their behavior, make me feel guilty for wanting basic consideration. This letter will create a record of facts they can't rewrite or deny." I'd been studying the psychological manipulation tactics described in the Audience Insights document Sarah had brought me from work. The pattern was textbook narcissistic family dynamics. Love bombing followed by devaluation, financial exploitation disguised as family support, emotional manipulation masked as need. The letter had to accomplish several strategic objectives. First, establish an undeniable timeline of events. Second, quote their exact words back to them. Third, make clear the consequences of their choices. Fourth, set firm boundaries they couldn't negotiate around. But most importantly, it had to free me from the psychological trap of hoping they'd change. I started with 17 drafts. The early versions were too emotional, too angry, too focused on hurt feelings rather than concrete actions. By draft 10, I was getting clinical, factual, undeniable. When you read this, I will be gone, the letter began. Not missing, not kidnapped, not in danger. Gone by choice, permanently. I documented the timeline with precision. October 15th, 9:47 p.m. Hospital called about your daughter's critical condition. Your response, we can't come. Emma is walking her dog. October 15th, 11:23 p.m. Hospital called again, stating tonight might be her last. Your response, Emma is too upset to be left alone. I included direct quotes from their text messages, printed from screenshots, their words in their own casual dismissal of my emergency, their secret family chat discussing my medical crisis as an inconvenience to Emma's art show. You chose a dog walk over your daughter's life. You chose art show scheduling over deathbed visits. You chose maintaining Emma's comfort over acknowledging my existence during the worst week of my life. The letter wasn't about blame, it was about choice. Their choices clearly documented, with natural consequences clearly stated. I'm not angry, I wrote, and I meant it. Anger assumes expectation of different behavior. I no longer expect anything from people who have shown me exactly who they are. This is simply me choosing myself over a family that doesn't value me. The boundary setting was non-negotiable. Don't call, don't visit, don't send flying monkeys. To guilt me into returning. Don't expect birthday cards, holiday calls, or emergency assistance. You taught me that family obligations are optional. I'm simply applying that lesson. But the most powerful part was the ending. I am not your victim anymore. I am not your ATM anymore. I am not your emotional support system anymore. I am not your backup plan anymore. I am building a life where I matter to the people who claim to love me. Since that will never be you, I'm building it without you. Sarah read the final draft and was quiet for a long time. This is nuclear, she finally said. Good. They've been dropping emotional bombs on me for decades. Time to return the favor. The strategic timing was crucial. I'd learned from the corporate negotiations that timing determines impact. Too early, and they could intervene. Too late, and the moment loses power. The sweet spot was their weekly family dinner, when they'd all be together, when the absence would be most dramatic. I arranged my discharge for Thursday morning. The family dinner was Thursday evening. They'd discover the empty bed and the letter simultaneously, in front of each other, with no time to craft individual responses or coordinate damage control. Dr. Williams helped me plan the medical side. You're recovered enough for discharge, but you'll need follow-up care. Do you have support for that? I'm building a new support system, I told him, one that actually shows up. Sarah helped with the practical logistics. Her guest room was available indefinitely. She'd taken time off work to help with my transition. She'd researched therapists who specialized in family trauma. She'd even found support groups for adult children of narcissistic parents. Why are you doing all this? I asked her one evening as she organized my discharge paperwork. Because this is what normal people do when someone they care about is in crisis, she said simply. They show up. Show up. Such a simple concept that my family had never grasped. The night before discharge, I called my bank and credit cards. New account numbers, new addresses, new emergency contacts. I wasn't just leaving them emotionally, I was cutting every financial tie that had bound me to their dysfunction. 28 years of conditioning told me I was being cruel, selfish, dramatic. But the facts were undeniable. They'd had 7 days to visit their critically injured daughter. They'd found time for dog grooming, art show planning, and social media posting. They hadn't found 2 hours for a deathbed visit. Actions reveal priorities. Their actions revealed that I wasn't one. The letter was sealed, addressed to the Martinez family, and placed prominently on the hospital bed. I'd included a second envelope marked for Emma with a shorter note. I hope Princess is worth what this cost us. As I walked out of that hospital Thursday morning, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. The lightness of not carrying other people's emotional baggage. For the first time in my adult life, the only person I was responsible for saving was myself. They'd find the empty bed that evening. They'd read the letter that documented their choices in their own words. They'd realize that the daughter they'd taken for granted had taken herself away permanently. And for once in my life, I wouldn't be there to clean up the mess, solve the problem, or make their feelings more comfortable. I was building a life where I mattered, and that life was about to begin. 3 days passed in blissful silence. 3 days of Sarah's guest room, homemade meals, and the strange peace that comes from not being anyone's emergency contact. 3 days of healing without interruption, of making decisions based solely on my own needs, of remembering what it felt like to matter to the people around me. Then my phone started ringing. I'd blocked their numbers, of course, but they were creative. Unknown numbers, work phones, numbers borrowed from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. The voicemails started desperate and quickly escalated to angry. "Rebecca, this is Mom. We got your letter. We don't understand why you're being so dramatic. Call us back immediately." "Becca, it's Dad. Your mother is beside herself. You're being completely unreasonable. We were dealing with a crisis with Emma. The dog was sick." Princess was sick. That was their new story. The dog walk had become a veterinary emergency that justified abandoning their dying daughter. I almost admired their ability to rewrite history in real time. But Emma's voicemail was different. "Rebecca, I read what you wrote. I didn't know they said those things to the hospital. I thought they were there with you. Mom told me you were stable and didn't want visitors. I'm so sorry. Please call me back. Please." The gaslighting had reached Emma, too. They'd told her I was stable and didn't want visitors while telling the hospital staff that Princess's bathroom schedule took priority over my potential death. They'd managed their narrative so well that even Emma didn't know the truth until my letter spelled it out. Sarah found me listening to the voicemails Thursday evening, 3 days after my disappearance. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Vindicated," I said. "Listen to this." I played Dad's latest message. "Rebecca, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this letter is completely out of line. We're a family. We stick together through difficult times. Your mother is having chest pains from the stress you're causing. Is that what you want?" Classic manipulation, Sarah observed. Ami make you responsible for their emotional reactions to consequences they created. The pattern was predictable because I'd lived it for 28 years. Create a crisis, blame me for the consequences, demand I fix their feelings about their own behavior. But this time, I wasn't there to absorb their emotional chaos. By day 4, they'd escalated to sending relatives. My Aunt Carol, whom I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, showed up at Sarah's apartment with tears and guilt trips. "Your parents are devastated," she said through the intercom. "Your mother can't stop crying. How can you do this to family?" "Did they tell you why I left?" I asked through the speaker. "They said you had some kind of breakdown after your accident, that you're not thinking clearly." "Did they tell you they didn't visit me once during a week-long ICU stay? Did they mention prioritizing dog walking over potential deathbed visits?" Silence. Then, that can't be right. Call the hospital. Ask the nursing staff. Ask Dr. Williams. Ask anyone except the people who lied to you about what happened. I buzzed her in and showed her the documented timeline, the text message screenshots, the hospital notes Dr. Williams had helped me obtain. Aunt Carol's face went through the same transformation mine had. Disbelief, recognition, horror, understanding. "My God," she whispered. "I had no idea." "That's their superpower," I explained. "They're excellent at managing their image while destroying their target." "You probably got the Rebecca is having a breakdown story before you even agreed to come here." She nodded slowly. "Your mother called crying, said you'd written a cruel letter and disappeared. She made it sound like you'd snapped for no reason." "Classic Darvo," Sarah said, joining us. "Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. They're not the parents who abandoned their dying daughter. Rebecca is the cruel daughter who wrote a mean letter." Aunt Carol stayed for 2 hours, asking questions, reviewing evidence, apologizing repeatedly. When she left, she hugged me tight and said, "I'm proud of you for getting out. I wish I'd known sooner." That's when I realized the letter had done more than free me. It had created ripples. Over the next week, I learned that my disappearance had become family news. Cousins I barely knew were calling with questions. Family friends were asking uncomfortable questions about why their daughter had cut contact so dramatically. The secret was out, and secrets have power only in darkness. My mother's sister, Aunt Linda, called my work phone on day 8. "Rebecca, it's Linda. I heard what happened. I've been thinking about some things, and I need to tell you something." What she told me changed everything. "Your parents did this before," she said. "When your grandmother was dying 15 years ago. They missed her last days because Emma had some college crisis, said they'd visit Grandma when Emma felt better. She died waiting for them. I'd been 12 when Grandma died. I remembered Mom crying at the funeral, talking about how sudden it was, how they didn't get to say goodbye. I never knew they'd chosen not to say goodbye." "There's more," Linda continued. "Your cousin Michael's wedding 5 years ago? They RSVP'd yes, then didn't show because Princess had to go to the vet. Your high school graduation. They almost missed it because Emma had a breakup crisis that morning." Pattern recognition hit like lightning. This wasn't a one-time failure during my medical emergency. This was their standard operating procedure. Prioritize Emma and Princess. Use me as the safety net. Manage the narrative to avoid accountability. But now people were connecting dots. Linda had started asking other relatives about their experiences with my parents. The stories were remarkably consistent. Last-minute cancellations for Emma's needs, financial requests that became permanent loans, emotional support that flowed only one direction. Half the family thought you were the golden child because they always talked about how successful and independent you were, Linda said. Now we're realizing that was code for the one who pays for everything and asks for nothing. The revelation was simultaneously validating and heartbreaking. I hadn't imagined the favoritism, the exploitation, the emotional manipulation. But I also hadn't realized how completely they'd isolated me from potential allies within the family. By day 10, my parents had moved to the anger phase. Dad left a voicemail that revealed their true feelings. "Rebecca, you're being selfish and vindictive. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? Fine. If you want to throw away your family over one misunderstanding, that's your choice. But don't come crawling back when you realize what you've lost." Everything they'd done for me, 28 years of financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and systematic devaluation, and they considered themselves the generous ones. Emma's messages had stopped entirely. I later learned through Aunt Linda that Emma was having her own crisis of recognition. She demanded to see the hospital records, the nursing notes, the timeline of calls. When confronted with undeniable evidence, she'd locked herself in her room with Princess and refused to speak to our parents for 3 days. "She's starting to ask questions about other things too," Linda reported. "Like why she never had to pay for anything while you covered all the family emergencies. Why her problems always took priority over your achievements. She's not handling the truth very well." Good. Emma needed to confront her role as the unwitting weapon in my destruction. She'd benefited from the system that sacrificed me, even if she hadn't designed it. The social consequences were building momentum. Church friends started asking where I was. Neighbors noticed my absence from family gatherings. My parents' carefully managed image was cracking as people realized their successful, independent daughter had disappeared completely. But the most satisfying consequence was entirely unexpected. Linda called with an update that made me laugh for the first time in weeks. "Your parents tried to get Princess groomed yesterday. Apparently, they've been using your credit card for her appointments for the past 2 years. When the card was declined, they had to explain they no longer had access to their daughter's money. The groomer asked why, and your mother broke down crying in front of a waiting room full of people, explaining that you'd abandoned the family after a minor disagreement." A minor disagreement? My near-death experience and their complete abandonment had become a minor disagreement in their revisionist history. Then, Linda continued, another customer in the waiting room said, "Wait, aren't you the parents of that woman who almost died and you didn't visit her?" Turns out it was Mrs. Patterson from your old neighborhood. She'd heard the story from someone at the hospital. Public accountability. The one thing narcissists fear most, being exposed for who they really are, in front of people whose opinions matter to them. 6 months after leaving that letter, I barely recognized my life. Sarah's guest room had become a temporary home that felt more like family than my childhood house ever had. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, I'd started using my full title as a reminder of my worth, was thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible. Without the constant drain of family financial requests, I'd saved more money in 6 months than in the previous 3 years. Without the emotional chaos of being everyone's crisis manager, I'd slept through the night consistently for the first time in decades. Without the obligation to drop everything for their emergencies, I'd been promoted to senior project manager. The therapy Sarah had helped me find was transformational. Dr. Chen, no relation to my former hospital roommate, but equally wise, specialized in adult children of narcissistic families. She helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just family dysfunction, but systematic psychological abuse disguised as love. You weren't just the family ATM, she explained during one session. You were the emotional shock absorber. Every crisis, every conflict, every uncomfortable feeling got redirected to you to solve. They outsourced their emotional regulation to their own daughter. The clarity was liberating and horrifying. I'd spent my entire adult life managing other people's emotions while having my own dismissed as dramatic or selfish. I'd been trained from childhood to believe that my value came from my utility, my worth from my willingness to sacrifice. But the most unexpected part of my new life was the relationships that bloomed once I had space for them. Sarah and I had become genuine friends, the kind where support flowed both directions. I'd joined a book club, started volunteering at a literacy center, even gone on a few dates with a teacher named Marcus, who thought my boundaries were attractive rather than inconvenient. Marcus was everything my family wasn't: reliable, emotionally available, genuinely interested in my well-being, without expecting anything in return. When I told him about my decision to cut contact with my family, he said, "That must have taken incredible courage. I'm proud of you for choosing yourself." Choosing myself. Such a simple concept that felt revolutionary after decades of choosing everyone else. The ripple effects continued expanding. Aunt Linda had become my unofficial family informant, updating me on the ongoing consequences of my disappearance. The news wasn't flattering for my parents. "Your mother tried to organize her usual elaborate Christmas celebration," Linda reported in December. But half the family declined. People are starting to ask uncomfortable questions about why you're not there, and they're not buying the "Rebecca is going through a difficult phase" explanation anymore. The family friend network was equally skeptical. People who'd known me for years were connecting my sudden absence with whispered stories about the hospital incident. My parents' reputation for reliability and family values was crumbling under scrutiny. But the most significant consequence was Emma's transformation. According to Linda, Emma had spent months in her own therapy, processing her role as the golden child in a toxic family system. She'd started paying her own bills for the first time in her adult life. She'd moved out of the family home. Most surprisingly, she'd rehomed Princess. "She said she couldn't look at the dog without thinking about the night you almost died," Linda explained. She found Princess a loving home with a retired couple who could give her full attention. Emma said it was time to stop living like a child. I felt a complex mix of emotions about Emma's growth: relief that she was breaking free, sadness that it took my near death and disappearance for her to recognize the dysfunction, and cautious hope that someday we might have a relationship based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. The validation continued coming from unexpected sources. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who'd witnessed the grooming salon breakdown, reached out through Linda to express her support. "Tell Rebecca that what her parents did was unforgivable," she said. "I've been a nurse for 40 years, and family members who don't show up during medical emergencies are either estranged for good reason or terrible people." Since Rebecca was supporting them financially, it's clearly the latter. Professional validation mattered too. Dr. Williams, my surgeon, had been so disturbed by my family's behavior that he'd discussed it with the hospital's social work department. They'd flagged my case as an example of family medical neglect for training purposes. My experience was being used to help hospital staff identify and support other patients with toxic families. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was the financial reality hitting home. Linda reported that my parents had been forced to downsize their lifestyle significantly without my financial support. Dad's business had always been unstable. I'd been the one covering shortfalls. Mom's medical expenses, previously handled by my emergency fund contributions, were now their responsibility alone. "They're learning what their choices actually cost," Linda observed. "Your father had to take a part-time job at 62. Your mother is talking about selling the house. They're experiencing the financial insecurity you protected them from for decades." Natural consequences. I wasn't punishing them. I was simply no longer enabling them to avoid the results of their own choices. The most unexpected contact came in March, almost a year after my disappearance. A letter addressed to Dr. Rebecca Martinez arrived at my new apartment. I'd moved out of Sarah's place into my own space, a bright one-bedroom with plants and art that made me happy. The letter was from Emma. "Rebecca," it began, "I know I don't have the right to contact you, and I'll understand if you throw this away without reading it, but I need you to know some things. I've been in therapy for 8 months trying to understand how our family got so messed up. I'm starting to see how I benefited from a system that hurt you. I was comfortable being the favorite because it meant I never had to take responsibility for anything. You paid the price for my comfort. I rehomed Princess because every time I looked at her, I remembered that Mom and Dad chose her bathroom schedule over your life. That's not Princess's fault, but I couldn't separate the dog from that choice. I'm working, paying my own bills, living independently for the first time at 26. I'm learning what you knew at 18, how to be an adult. I'm ashamed it took me this long. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a relationship. I just want you to know that your letter didn't just free you, it freed me too. I'm becoming a person I can respect, and that wouldn't have happened if you hadn't been brave enough to tell the truth. I hope you're happy. You deserve happiness. Love, Emma. P.S. Mom and Dad are exactly the same. They haven't learned anything. They still blame you for abandoning the family and claim they did nothing wrong. Some people can't change. I'm glad you stopped waiting for them to. I cried reading that letter. Not sad tears, but the complex emotions of grief and relief intertwined. Grief for the sister relationship we'd never had. Relief that she was finally growing into someone worth knowing. I wrote back, not a long letter, but a door left slightly open. Emma, I'm proud of you for doing the work to change. Growth takes courage. If you continue on this path of taking responsibility for your choices and building an independent life, perhaps we can explore what a healthy relationship might look like. But I won't be anyone's sister who expects me to be smaller so they can feel bigger. keep growing. Rebecca. The full circle moment came that spring when I was contacted by a local support group for adult children of narcissistic families. They'd heard about my story through Dr. Chen and wanted to know if I'd be willing to share my experience with newly escaped adult children. Standing in front of 20 people who'd lived variations of my story, I realized that my letter hadn't just saved me, it had created a template for others. Several group members had written their own versions, documenting abuse and setting boundaries their families couldn't manipulate around. The most important thing I learned, I told them, is that you can't love people into treating you better. You can't sacrifice enough to earn respect from people who see sacrifice as your purpose. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is remove yourself from a dynamic that destroys you. After the meeting, a young woman approached me. My parents missed my college graduation because my brother's dog needed surgery, she said. I've been making excuses for them for 3 years, but hearing your story, I think I need to write my own letter. That's when I understood the true justice of my situation. Not revenge, revolution. I'd broken a generational pattern of accepting unacceptable treatment in the name of family loyalty. I'd chosen myself over a system designed to exploit me, and now others were finding the courage to do the same. My parents never apologized, never acknowledged wrongdoing, never changed, but their opinion of my choices no longer mattered. I'd built a life where I was valued, supported, celebrated. I'd created the family I'd always wanted, one that showed up. 2 years after leaving that letter on an empty hospital bed, I was getting married. Not to Marcus, that relationship had run its course after 8 lovely months, but to David, an emergency room doctor who understood the importance of showing up for people you love. David and I met at a medical conference where I was presenting on patient advocacy systems. He approached me after my presentation and said, "Your research on family support networks is fascinating. Have you considered the impact of toxic family dynamics on patient recovery?" I'd laughed and said, "I've done some first-hand research on that topic." Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect, shared values, and the radical concept that love should make your life better, not more complicated. David had his own story of setting boundaries with difficult family members, which gave him insight into the courage my decision had required. The fact that you chose your own well-being over family dysfunction tells me everything I need to know about your character, he'd said early in our relationship. You're someone who values authenticity over comfort. That's rare and beautiful. Planning our wedding brought unexpected challenges and revelations. The guest list was smaller than most people's, chosen family rather than biological obligation. Sarah was my maid of honor. Aunt Linda walked me down the aisle. Dr. Chen was invited as the person who'd helped me understand that healing was possible. Emma sent a card with a simple message. "Wishing you all the happiness you deserve. Thank you for showing me what healthy boundaries look like." She didn't ask for an invitation, and I appreciated that growth. We'd been exchanging letters quarterly for the past year, real communication about our actual lives rather than family drama management. My parents weren't invited, obviously, but their absence felt like relief rather than loss. There would be no last-minute drama, no emotional manipulation disguised as family feelings, no financial requests that turned celebrations into stress. David's family embraced me completely, but not in the overwhelming, boundary-violating way I'd learned to fear. His mother, Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychologist, which seemed fitting, told me at our engagement dinner, "David has told us about your journey to build healthy relationships. We're honored that you've chosen to include us in your life, and we want you to know that our love comes without conditions or expectations." Love without conditions or expectations. I'd thought that was a myth until I experienced it. The wedding was small, intimate, and exactly what we wanted. No family drama, no obligation guests, no financial manipulation. Just people who genuinely celebrated our happiness. During my speech, I thanked everyone for being the kind of family I'd always dreamed of, one that showed up, supported each other, and respected boundaries. 2 years ago, I learned that sometimes you have to break away from the family you're born into to find the family you're meant to have, I said. Thank you all for proving that authentic love exists and for helping me build a life where I matter. Professional life continued flourishing. The promotion had led to another promotion. I'd started consulting on workplace communication and conflict resolution, drawing on my experience with psychological manipulation tactics. My expertise in recognizing and dismantling toxic dynamics was surprisingly valuable in corporate settings. I'd also begun writing. First, a blog about recovery from family trauma that attracted thousands of readers. Then articles for psychology publications about the intersection of medical emergencies and family dysfunction. Eventually, a book proposal that 3 publishers wanted. Abandoned When Family Fails and How to Build Better would be published the following year. The book combined my personal story with research on family trauma, practical strategies for setting boundaries, and hope for those still trapped in toxic family systems. But the most meaningful aspect of my new life was the ripple effect of healing. The support group I'd spoken to had grown into a monthly workshop I co-facilitated with Dr. Chen. We'd helped over 100 people recognize, document, and escape family abuse, disguised as love. Many used letter writing as their tool for clarity and boundary setting. Some went no contact like me. Others used the documentation process to set firm boundaries while maintaining limited contact. All found relief in having their experiences validated and their decisions supported. "You gave me permission to value myself," one participant told me. I'd spent 30 years believing that family meant accepting mistreatment. Your story showed me that real love doesn't require self-destruction. The financial independence was remarkable. Without the constant drain of family financial emergencies, I'd built an emergency fund, invested in retirement, and even bought a house. The same salary that had barely covered my expenses when I was supporting 4 adults now provided security and options. I'd kept detailed records of what I'd spent on family support over the years. The total was staggering, over $200,000 in direct financial support, plus uncounted hours of emotional labor, crisis management, and problem solving. Money and energy that was now invested in my own life, my own dreams, my own future. The house David and I bought together was everything my childhood home wasn't. Peaceful, organized, filled with people who wanted to be there. We hosted dinner parties where guests actually wanted to attend, holiday celebrations based on joy rather than obligation, and gatherings where laughter wasn't followed by drama. 3 years after my escape, Linda called with news I'd been expecting. "Your father had a heart attack," she said. "He's stable, but your mother asked if I thought you'd want to know." I felt nothing. No guilt, no obligation, no desire to rush back into their drama. Just the calm certainty that their medical emergencies were no longer my responsibility. "Please tell her I hope he recovers," I said, "and that she has my contact information if she needs to arrange practical matters through a lawyer. But I won't be visiting or resuming contact." She said she thought you'd come back if something serious happened to them. She thought wrong. Medical emergencies don't erase years of psychological abuse or justify returning to toxic situations. I hope Dad gets better, but getting better doesn't require my presence. Linda was quiet for a moment. "You sound so peaceful," she finally said. "I am peaceful. For the first time in my adult life, I'm living for myself instead of managing other people's emotions. It's exactly as wonderful as I hoped it would be." The conversation reminded me of how completely I'd transformed. The Rebecca who'd answered every 2 a.m. crisis call, who'd drained her savings for other people's emergencies, who'd believed that love required self-sacrifice, that person was gone. In her place was someone who understood that authentic love makes your life better, not harder. My story didn't end with revenge or reconciliation. It ended with something better. A life built on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued me as I was rather than what I could provide. I'd learned that you don't owe anyone access to your life simply because you share DNA. You don't owe anyone your mental health, your financial security, or your emotional well-being. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is save yourself from people who claim to love you but consistently choose their own comfort over your basic needs. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is remove yourself from a dynamic that destroys you. I'd started with a letter on an empty hospital bed. I'd built a life where I mattered, and every day I chose that life again. Not out of anger or spite, but out of the radical belief that I deserved to be valued by the people who claimed to love me. That's not too much to ask. It's the minimum requirement for authentic relationship. And if your family of origin can't meet that minimum, you have permission to build a family that can. You have permission to matter. You have permission to be valued. You have permission to choose yourself. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give toxic people is your absence, and the greatest gift you can give yourself is the freedom to be loved properly. The letter that started as an ending became a beginning. The life I'd built in its aftermath was everything I'd dreamed family could be, just not with the people I'd expected. And that was more than enough. It was everything.